بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. لا حول ولا قوة الا بالله العلی العظیم. الحمد لله رب العالمین و صلی الله علی سیدنا و نبینا ابی القاسم المصطفى محمد و آله الطیبین الطاهرین لا سیما بقیة الله فی الارضین عجل الله تعالی فرجه الشریف. اللهم اخرجنی من ظلمات الوهم و اکرمنی بنور الفهم. اللهم افتح علينا ابواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا ارحم الراحمين. خب, we continue our study of Islamic theory of law according to the late Ayatollah Misbah rahmatullah alayh. He says some people believe in natural law, and he says this is close to our view, but we are not exactly agreeing on the same things. We believe that it is true that law has its origins in reality, in the facts. Real interests and harms can be the basis of law. But we should not expect to be able to discover law in the way that we discover realities in physics or chemistry or biology. It's not that much available or easily available to our reason, to our intellect. As evidence, you see that for thousands of years there are fundamental differences among philosophers of law, and maybe you don't find such diversity in other areas. Then he says part of the complexity of the issue is that there are lots of interactions in social life between different aspects of human social behavior, to the extent that human mind cannot exhaust all these conditions and all these factors and their interactions. Plus, we are not only interested in worldly interest, worldly social interest, or worldly social happiness, although that is important for us, but we said that we want also to have happiness in the hereafter. So for us, سعادت اجتماعی, social happiness, is just an intermediate aim. It's not the final aim, ultimate aim. So when we have such high aim and when we have such complexity in society, then how can we expect to be able to understand everything through our reason from realities of the world? Our reason normally understands things through experience. For example, if you want to see whether factor A has a role in disease, you consider existence of this factor with existence or non-existence of that disease, and also non-existence of this factor with existence and non-existence of the disease. And then if you see that every time that this disease is there, this factor is there, then you say it's very likely that this disease contributes to that illness. But you should be able to control the situation and examine this when there is no disease, or when there is disease, when there is no this factor or there is such factor, and then can make some explanation. But we cannot do this in law, especially the part about the hereafter. For example, how can you say that, with Salat, he mentions the example of Salatul Fajr. With Salatul Fajr, for example, we can have this in the hereafter. Without Salat al-Fajr, we cannot have this in the hereafter. Also about many things. Maybe many things about charity laws in Islam, maybe about marital law in Islam. Some of the basics we can understand, but many of these things we get it through revelation. So to say that law is based on realities is acceptable. To say that therefore with our aql, with our intellect, we can understand part of it, it's acceptable. But to say that we can understand everything by ourselves, by our reason, no. Then he has a discussion about who has the right for making law, for legislation. So we said we cannot make the law for ourselves or for others. And he says this is something general. It's not that some people can do this on our behalf also. Human beings in principle cannot make law for themselves or for others. In order to explain this, he uses the concept of اعتباری, the notions, the concepts which are اعتباری. اعتباری has different meanings. So here what we mean is something that we learn from realities and then we suppose in non-factual relations. For example, malikiyat, ownership. Ownership is a reality. We understand it when there is existential relation between the owner and what is owned. For example, we have some kind of ownership with respect to our organs. My eyes are mine. Because I have control over them, I can use them. My hand is mine because I can have control. Then we extend it to the things which we don't have real ownership. Like I buy a car, I buy some books. The relation between the book and car with me is not like the relation of my eyes and hands with me. But because now I have control over this book or car, I can use it and I can say to others, you are not able to use it. Then we imagine a kind of ownership which is not real, it's not haqiqi or waqi'i. It is based on our assumption. It's based on our supposition. خب everything when it comes to the origin of milkiyat belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ourselves and everything on this planet belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything belongs to Him. Can we assume ownership in the way that would conflict with Allah's ownership and Allah's will? Because the owner has the will to decide how to use and not to use. We cannot make any law against the will of the true and real owner. Okay? So this is very important point. Also when it comes to purpose, we cannot make assumptions about ownership which would be against the will of the owner. So Ayatollah Misbah mentions two things. One is خواستگاه اعتبار, the origin of this kind of ownership, and second, غرض, the purpose of اعتبار. So you can suppose there is ownership through buying, selling, I don't know, inheritance, gifts. There are different ways of becoming owner, but they should not be in conflict with the origin and the purpose that the true owner has for these things. So you cannot ignore facts. Therefore, no one other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the right to make law. The question was, who is the lawmaker? And under his law, we can make some, derivative decisions in consideration of his law. Let me read for you this paragraph. کوتاه سخن آنکه چون احکام و مقررات خواه فردی و خواه اجتماعی باید هم با مصالح این جهانی و هم با مصالح اخروی و ابدی سازگار باشد. So briefly, since rulings and laws, whether individual or social, must be compatible with both worldly interests and the other worldly interests, number one, و عقل بشر از کشف وجود و عدم این دو سازگاری ناتوان است. And human intellect cannot understand whether these two are compatible or not, especially the second one, when it comes to the other worldly interests. For the interests of this world, we have difficulty. You see, in thousands of years, we have not come to agreement. There are lots of differences in different schools of thought. They keep changing, etc. Let alone about the interests of the hereafter. So we cannot make the law. پس بشر نمیتواند قانون وضع کند. از سوی دیگر, also, moreover, چون تنها خدای متعال است که اولا دانای نهان و آشکار است و همه مصالح دنیوی و اخروی و ابدی انسانها را می‌داند و نزدیکترین و بهترین راه‌های تحصیل آن مصالح را می‌شناسد و ثانیاً تحت تأثیر هواهای نفسانی و اغراض شخصی واقع نمی‌شود و ثالثاً خالق جهان هستی و مالک و صاحب اختیار حقیقی آن است. پس تنها هموست که میتواند جعل و وضع قانون کند. Moreover, since Allah the Almighty is aware of everything hidden or explicit, He knows all worldly and otherworldly and eternal interests of human beings, and He knows the best ways and means to achieve them. Secondly, He is not suffering any ego or selfishness. And thirdly, He is the creator of this world and the real owner of it. So we have difficulties on human side, restrictions about knowledge, etc. And we have all the things that give Allah the authority. So He is the one who can make the law. Now, what about the judge? Judge is not making the law. Judge applies social laws and regulations to particular cases. For example, we have in law what should be done to a thief when commits the theft under certain circumstances, for example, or I don't know, someone who has been driving very fast, for example, or without driving license. So what should we do? The judge is not making the law. The judge is applying laws to the cases. He has to find out that this case is the subject. No one can say, even police may not be able to decide. Yes, maybe in some cases, the police can issue a ticket, penalty, but even here, if the other person doesn't accept, can take this to the court, and the judge decides and says whether you were, guilty or not. So now the question is, what is the authority, or where does the authority come for the judgment of the judge? And why both parties, or if there are more than two parties, all the parties should accept this? In the same way that for law in general, we said, some people say it's based on contract and agreement of people. Here also some people have said the same thing. They said, okay, two people, when they don't agree, they don't have any way to solve their problem, they go to a third person and they say, please judge between us, kind of arbitration. And because they both were happy with this person, approved this person, then this is very, reliable. But the reality is that this is very, very uncommon in the society. How many times people choose who would be the judge among them and agree on the judge among them? He says, in the same state or province or city, there is no agreement among people about who would be the judge or who would be judges. The maximum is that, for example, they have a system which is run based on majority, and based on the view of majority, they have laws for who would be qualified for judge, how to employ them, and etc. The maximum is majority. So maybe 50% plus one, or maybe even less, majority of those who vote. Sometimes maybe those who have voted are not half of the population. But in any case, the other party, the minority, no one listens to them. It's not that they say, okay, let us negotiate and agree on a judge. This is different from arbitration. Another problem is that even if they ask people to vote for judges, and they are not appointed by a system, people are not always aware of who is a good judge and qualified judge, because it's not their field. And even if there is, election, etc., as we said before, sometimes people with power, with money, they have interest in, using techniques to manipulate votes of people. So it may look as if there is election, but it may be not real election. Another problem is that you want to secure real interests of people. Real interests of people. In many situations, if you go for vote, even people, forget those who want to manipulate. Even people may not know what is their real interest, or even if they know, they may go for their short interests. What is easier for them? What is, more enjoyable for them? It's not that they would necessarily vote for their best long-term interests. Another issue is that Ayatollah Misbah says this is very fundamental issue, is that based on our monotheistic and Islamic view, we believe that authority belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And only rulers, hukam, I add of course hukam. He talks about Qazi, but it's the same. Rulers and judges who are authorized by him can have power to ask people to give up part of their freedom. If two people agree on the judge, okay, we can say they agreed. But if two people don't agree, why minority must accept the decision of majority? Who has given authority to majority to force minority? And if the judge is appointed by majority, where does he get the authority? Of course, if we didn't have any solution, this is my point. If we didn't have any solution, if we didn't have divine law, if there was no arrangement in law of Islam or religion about these issues, we could say, okay, as much as they agree, that's great. Otherwise, if they cannot agree and we need to make a decision, so we go by majority because we have no choice. But first of all, the view of majority doesn't fix the reality. Number two, you can only keep this then to the minimum, where if we don't go to majority, we will have chaos. You can say chaos, like lack of order in the society, is worse than forcing minority. But you cannot go beyond that. We have no power, if you are majority, we have no power, no authority, no moral right to force the other party to compromise about their rights, about freedom, so that the society is run in the way that we want. We cannot force them. Unless, as I said, there are minimal cases that urgency, emergency would require to do something. Otherwise, we will have something worse than forcing minority. So this is something that we need to discuss about Islamic political theory also. This is about what is the origin or the authority for judges. The next issue is about what is the origin of authority or validity of governance and governments. منشأ اعتبار حکومت و دولت. This is very closely connected to the issue of the judge. He says those who believe in democracy and liberalism, here also they would say the view of people is the origin of this power for the state or governance. They give legitimacy and authority. Ayatollah Misbah says طرفداران مردم سالاری و آزادی خواهی در این مسئله نیز همچنان خواست مردم را منشأ اعتبار میپندارند و میگویند دستگاه اجرایی در هر جامعه اعتبار خود را از خواست اعضای همان جامعه کسب میکنند. So the executive power which the government has, we are not talking about judiciary, we talked already about judges. We are not talking about legislative part, we have already talked about lawmakers. We are just talking about the executive side. So they say the executive power is based on view of the members of that society. بر این اساس مجریان قانون یعنی دولت مردان و زمامداران حکومت باید برگزیدگان مردم باشند. Therefore, the governors, those who occupy different positions in the government, they should be chosen by people through a kind of direct or indirect election. Ayatollah Misbah says they argue the same way here. They say that it's like, for example, people who decide to form a corporation. They want to, for example, make some investments. They register a company. They choose one of themselves as the executive director, Mudir Amil, and they say, okay, based on these decisions, we can run this corporation. The director has no authority by himself. He's not above them. He's not superior to them. He cannot demand obedience from them. He is just there to implement the decisions made by the board of the owners, for example, or those who have, stocks, etc. Of course, they give him some authority to make small decisions. It's not that for every decision they ask him to take permission from them. So they say in society also, in order to achieve their social aims, they can choose one person as governor, can be president, can be prime minister, whatever is the system, and ask him to implement, to execute the laws that they have made. It's not that they appoint someone and say, you also make the law. No. They make the law in parliament, the people. And they appoint someone and say, you can implement them. And they say, since people have direct or indirect role in choosing such people, then this person can also better function, because people would then feel he belongs to them, and they would support, and they would cooperate and collaborate more. But Ayatollah Misbah says the same problems we had in the past would repeat themselves. He says, even in one city or village, it's very unlikely to have consensus of people, that all people agree. Excuse me. This is not possible. I don't know if it has been any case in the history that all people, even in a small town, agreed on a ruler or leader or governor or etc. So there is majority then. When there is majority view, then the majority can decide about themselves. They cannot force their decisions on the minority. Why should the minority accept the decision of the majority? In the company, it's easy, because there are just few people. They can say, okay, we go by majority, and everyone agrees then that, okay, we go by majority vote. But in the society, there is no such possibility that they all agree. Plus, people who form a company normally are more aware who is better to be appointed as director. But in the society, it's very difficult. We have different levels of experience, knowledge, age. To expect people make good and enlightened choices or educated choices is not always possible. Then he says, suppose that all members of society have agreement about qualifications of a person. They all know, no one has manipulated their votes. So they say, Mr. A we all agree that is very good governor, but still this doesn't guarantee that this would be a great ruler. Why? Because there is a chance that, first of all, when people vote, even if no one from outside has manipulated, maybe their decision is somehow promoted by racism. They all agree on someone because of racism or tribalism, or sometimes sectarianism, or sometimes they have their own selfish interests and they think this person is going to serve their selfishness better. Therefore, many times you find that real reformers may not get the majority view, let alone consensus. If members of society are that good that they can agree on a true reformer, then that society is like heaven, that all people agree on a true reformer. He says به راستی کم پیش می آید که مردم کسی را به حکومت برگزینند که برخلاف خواسته های حیوانی و اغراض دنیوی آنان عمل کند و به راستی در اندیشه مصالح واقعی آنان باشد. It's very rare that people choose someone as their governor that would act against their worldly interests and just think about their real long-term human interests. It's very rare to find such choices, especially if it is by consensus. They normally choose someone that in what they think is important can deliver better. For example, if they want a rise in income, if they want, more pleasure, etc. He says, as example, for many people, the best mayor, shahdar, if they want to choose a mayor for their own district, is someone that would improve their own district, even if it is by disregarding other districts of the city or other cities, or sometimes issues about environment, etc. They may say, this is good for us, this is the best person for our district. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have in maybe system, parliamentarian system, that if someone is chosen as member of parliament for one city, they may try to bring, for example, universities to that. If there is, factories, they bring to their own city. Sometimes there is competition between them. Who is, winning this competition to bring everything to their own city? Sometimes it's based on just local interests. Sometimes it's not based on overall interest of the nation. They think, I have been elected by these people in my town, I have to make sure my town is growing, improving. Whether it's not fair is the secondary consideration. The main thing, they want to improve their own place. The fourth problem, he says, that the one who is chosen by all or majority how he can claim obedience from others. Others means minority in his own society and also others in other places. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has authority. Even if someone is chosen by all people, he cannot go against the will of Allah, even if all people have voted for him. He would be just able to act for implementation, because these people themselves have no authority over themselves. Yeah, They cannot decide, for example, to commit suicide or something like suicide. I cannot say, we all agree on this. He says there is a difference between judgment and governance. When it comes to there's a difference between legislation on the one hand and judgment and governance on the other hand. When it comes to legislation, Allah may make laws himself, or he may give authority to some people to make some secondary laws. But when it comes to judgment and governance, Allah would never himself judge or govern. Normally he doesn't judge, maybe in the course of history, sometime Allah communicated his judgment to the prophets, but in our time, Allah would never judge and would never govern. In the case of legislation, he makes the legislation and he also may appoint or authorize people. So there is a difference here. He says, البته قانونگذاری با قضا و حکومت فرقی دارد. Of course, legislation or lawmaking is different from judging and governing. و آن این که قانونگذاری هم به دست خود خدای متعال ممکن است صورت گیرد و هم توسط کسانی که او اذن قانونگذاری به آنان داده. Legislation can take place by Allah himself or those that he has given them right for making law. ولی قضا و حکومت هیچگاه مستقیما به دست خدای متعال صورت نمیپذیرد. But judgment and governance are never executed by Allah himself. بلکه همیشه توسط کسانی که از طرف. The maximum is that there are people that are authorized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to judge or rule, or maybe in some cases both. So he says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may make the legal body, the legal system, or those parts which are more general and more long-term by himself and communicate to us. And then those things which are temporary, those things which are secondary, those which are not very long-term, he may give authority to the Prophet or Imams to make that law. In the case of judgment and governance, it's different. Here, no one can go to Allah, if they have, a case, they cannot go to Allah and take their case to Allah and ask him to judge. So here, Allah would not act like a judge, ordinary judge or ordinary governor. Rather, he just gives us the norms and the regulations, and then we have to apply it as human beings, find who are the people who are capable of applying these rules. If there is a prophet or imam or people appointed by them, of course we go by their choice, otherwise we go by their regulations. In the famous case of Prophet Dawood, you are all familiar with this ayah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا داود إنا جعلناك خليفة في الأرض فاحكم بين الناس بالحق. O Dawood, we made you vicegerent on the earth, so judge among people or rule among people with the observation of the truth. So Allah himself appointed here. Who is the judge? Who is the ruler? But sometimes maybe we have to find out, like in this time. In this time we don't have anyone who is appointed by Allah or appointed directly by Imam or Prophet. We have the rules and we have to find out and implement. Okay, so alhamdulillah, this part also finished. The next part is منشأ قانونگذاری. Where do the laws come from? What is Islamic view? And then this continues about ربوبیت تشریعی, legislative lordship, about validity and authority of divine laws, and some questions. Ayatollah Misbah answers up to the end. Unfortunately, our course in this semester finished. We were not able to complete this discussion, but I hope inshallah we get tawfiq to complete this discussion bi'iznillah, for whoever is interested. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.